Good morning.
Good morning, Professor Isabel.
Hello, good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful. This is nice.
Yes, I think we were in the same session last year in ICDC.
It's possible, maybe, yes.
Yes. I was also coordinate the Zoom link and everything, and you were the head of the session last year as well.
Okay, so thank you so much. Ibrahim, how do you prefer me to call you? Because sometimes with the double name in Turkish, I
Mhm.
don't know how to do it.
Uh, you pronounce very well. Ibrahim is just fine.
Okay, thank you so much for all the assistance and cooperation.
No
Um,
problem. I give you the co-host option.
mhm,
And I will be here when the speakers want they share their screens
mhm.
and their slides presentations.
I did
Uh,
only receive the presentation from one of our speakers.
mhm. I
So
mean,
I don't. Mhm.
they can share their
Okay,
screen
so
directly,
wonderful.
but we ask just in case if they have problem technical, we can have it and then we can share it
Okay.
from our computers.
Mhm.
But first option, if they share their presentation, it will be better.
Wonderful. So then,
If it's
yes.
okay for you too.
No, yes. I really do prefer because in that way they can take the control on their presentation and it is more agile. So yes, of course,
Mhm.
definitely. Mhm.
And so I made you co-host,
Mhm.
and I'll let the floor to you. And if you need anything else, I'll be here during the session. And thank you very much again for joining.
Mhm. Thank you so much to all of you. Okay, so good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be again 1 year more in this international symposium that is quite interesting, not only for the topics that all every year they are very timely, but also for the great collection of researchers that are very deep in the perspective of communication and how it evolves, especially in our context, that we can understand that, of course, is continuously changing. During this year, the main thing that we have, we could say that it is very ambitious and very broad, but of course, it's something that is surrounding our everyday in communication. So for that, it's very interesting the way in which the different sections have been divided. So for that, we can focus specifically in aspects that are definitely key in assessing this situation. Today, our session will last for 1 hour and a half. I would like to check that we have all our participants we have. Do we have 5 participants, please? Can we check this? I think that I see most of the participants connected. Let me see. Well, okay, and that we can start with the first one because
First speaker is here, I guess.
speaker,
Ramazan Ege
yes.
Solak and Arzu Yavuz.
Wonderful. Okay, so today we will reflect about not only digital truth and what is happening with this algorithm that is changing everything and that is adding a kind of subjectivity into the floor that many times we feel that we are able to control, but not so much. Okay, so our first presentation will be about the algorithmic subjectivity and the crisis of intentionality. That for sure we understand that will be quite interesting. Yes. And we have here our presenters. Okay, maybe you can start because I only received some brief presentation from one of the presenters. So I would like you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind, very briefly before your presentations. Please keep in mind that you should take around 13 minutes presenting, so later we may have some time for the questions, okay? But please, if you don't mind, start with a brief presentation of yourself and your topic. So thank you so much for the following presenter, and the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hear you
My name is
perfectly.
Ramazan.
Mhm.
Thank you. My name is Ramazan. I'm a master's student, and I'll be presenting our work on algorithmic subjectivity, especially on the large language models.
Mhm. Okay, perfect. We see perfectly your screen.
Okay. Okay. Okay, first I'll talk briefly about the large language models. So LLMs are next token predictors. They are trained on a lot of data sets that are online, and those are usually text data sets. But recently, I think they started implementing voice data and visual data too. But what they do fundamentally is they are trained on large text files, and they first tokenize the text files and separate them into words and subword or sentences or chunks that are not necessarily words. And they, every time when a user asks them a question, they try to predict the next token based on the previous given tokens. And this is how they generally operate and how they become a generative AI. So they don't actually generate anything new, but they predict what is going to come given the previous inputs. And in this analysis, we decided to use only three very popular large language models: ChatGPT, Gemini, and Cloud. So they are like introducing a profound disruption into the fundamental assumptions in the communication theory. And they, the text that these models generate are usually coherent, semantically rich, and pragmatically functional. And yes, yeah. And we saw that the quality of the text produced by the LLMs are very close to the human text levels, but they do not have like a lived experience or consciousness on the background. So it is very interesting how they can produce this type of an output. And so in this study, we mainly argue that the LLMs should not be used as technical tools only. They should not be seen only as technical tools, but they also function as discursive actors that challenge the concepts in communication theory, like intentionality or authorship or subject position or communicative legitimacy. And the main question is that although LLMs are not conscious or intentional subjects, how can they speak as if they were those subjects? And how can they, for example, use first person pronouns for themselves? And how can they produce like coherent, persuasive, and sometimes emotionally expressive texts, even though they don't have emotions? Yeah, so the main problem is that in communication theory, the meaning is usually linked to a conscious or intentional speaker. And a text is expected to have a subject behind it, usually. And this person is usually someone who thinks, feels, experiences, and speaks with purpose. But LLMs don't have this background, and they don't have a subject behind. So this is challenging that the traditional assumption in the communication theory. But they can still produce coherent, fluent, and persuasive texts. And they can also use first person pronouns, speak as if they were expressing an experience, a previous lived experience. But behind this discourse, there is no living, feeling, or intending subject. And this creates like a theoretical problem for communication studies. So our key concept here is that the algorithmic subjectivity, this is referring to a discursive form that appears in LLM outputs, but not grounded in a conscious subject. In other words, an LLM is not a subject. So it has no lived experience, no embodied existence, no intention, and no consciousness. However, in the level of language, it can still perform subject position. It can take the position of the subject. Generally, it creates expressions like, I think, in my view, in this situation is concerning. I'm glad you asked this question. Those type of sentence structures that express emotion, they establish epistemic authority, they appear to think reflexively, and they still lack ontological agency. So a bit about the theoretical framework in the study is mainly based on these fundamental perspective. The first one is the post-structuralist critique of the subject. This approach doesn't see the subject as a stable, unified, and self-grounded center, but instead it argues that the subject is constructed within discourse and produced through language. And the second perspective is coming from the human-machine communication debates. And these debates question whether the machines are only technical tools that transmit messages, or whether they can occupy a certain position within the communicative process. And in this context, the study doesn't claim that LLMs are a conscious subject, but it takes seriously their capacity to produce subject position discursively. So we wanted to examine the impression of subjectivity, intention, emotion, and epistemic authority that is constructed in LLM outputs, but we're not trying to prove that LLMs think like humans, but instead we're trying to examine the how they speak from a textual level, and like questions about, do they feel or do they produce discursive effect, that is, if it is feeling, that type of a question, rather than comparing them with the actual humans and proving that they're similar to that. Not a question like that. And the questions are, what kind of differences exist between human text and LLM in terms of intentionally and emotional expression? And does communication legitimacy still require a conscious subject? And can algorithmic discourse be understood as a new communicative category? To do this, we wanted to create two different subjects. There will be 3 human participants, and we're using 3 different LLMs. And there are 2 different scenarios that we are trying to simulate. The first one is a first-person narrative on digital isolation. And the second scenario is an essay on sociocultural implications of generative AI that tests epistemic authority, modality, intellectual positioning. And we give this to both the LLMs and the human subjects. So there will be 12 texts in total that we're going to analyze. And the categories that we analyze them are the markers of intentionality, the affective positioning, modality, epistemic authority, narrative coherence, and simulated reflexivity. The first scenario is chosen because the personal narrative inherently requires a construction of an experienced subject. So it's based on the previous experience, and which we're trying to capture when comparing the LLM and the human outputs. And the argumentative essay is to understand the epistemic authority and the deployment of modality and the performance of the intellectual positioning. And so these 12 texts are analyzed in 3 different phases. The first one is the open coding, that we identify all instances of the 6 previously mentioned categories among all the 12 texts, and we do Excel coding and organize these instances into patterns and examine how different discursive strategies cluster and interact with human and LLM text respectively. And our third method is the selective coding, that compares patterns across human and LLM and identify the systemic differences in the positions of the subjects. So we have some preliminary findings and some expectations of findings. And so we expect both humans and LLMs to have markers of intentionality, but with qualitatively distinct characteristics. And human texts are more likely to embed intentionality within like biographical context, similar to the first scenario that we gave them. And LLM texts, however, we expect them to produce more generic intentionality markers and more use like formulated expressions of purpose. Like the aim of this discussion is, or it's important to consider like things that are very generic, but we don't usually encounter them in everyday life in the humans, but we encounter them usually in LLMs. The other one is effective positioning. We expect to see that the most pronounced differences between human and LLM texts is especially in the scenario 1, where the human participants are more likely to produce effective expressions grounded in embodied experiences. Like they reference more about the physical sensations, visceral responses, or emotionally charged memories that carry a weight in their living experiences. But we don't see that type of emotional distribution in LLM text. They usually produce more effective stimulation. The usage of emotions and words and empathetic framing is more structural, less about the physical feelings, more about the again generalized feelings. For the modalities, the LLM texts are exhibiting a distinctive modal profile characterized by systematic hedging and qualified certainty. And LLMs are trained with reinforcement learning, which we shorten as RLHF. And they contain artifacts of those that type of a training method. Because they are intentionally trained on being overconfident or like controversial claims. Like they are more tended to produce average claims and become more consistent and try to use more like expressions like could, may, might, or it's possible that, instead of giving like definitive answers. We'll go to the discussion. So we saw that LLMs don't fail to produce subjectivity, but they produce a different kind of subjectivity compared to the humans. And this is constituted through discursive strategies without being grounded in consciousness or embodied or based on living experiences. And LLMs can produce the discursive markers or intentionally without possessing genuine intention, but because they are trained on human written text previously, they still retain those markers in their responses. And our analysis suggest that the need for a fundamental expansion of the communication ontology and potentially a new branch of communication theory concerned with like the nature of communicative entities, that entities and their properties. The limitations is we only use 12 texts, and we only base this on 3 big LLMs that are trendy right now, but they might not be the trend in the near future. So we also do our experiments in English, but there could be different expressions in different languages, because culturally, the way that you speak in a language affects the way that you experience or express your emotions. So that's also a limitation that we need to address by replicating this similar type of studies in different languages too, and potentially do like a comparative study on those, which is a future direction. Overall, our study generally introduces the concept of algorithmic subjectivity as an analytical tool for examining the LLM-generated discourse. And this contributes to the field of the human-machine communication and gives a discoursive analysis of LLM outputs. And this study extends post-structuralist theories of the subject into the domain of artificial intelligence. As a result, LLMs are not conscious subjects, but they retain elements of consciousness, and they retain elements of the intentionality. They can discursively produce and think them as the subject and put them as the subject position. And this transforms the concept of intentionality, authorship, and communicative legitimacy. And potentially there needs to be some changes in the conventional definitions of these terms after LLMs. And that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Rama-san. It was very interesting, very well presented, and very well explained, even with this something that it is complex. Especially thank you because you explained very well the methodology. And as you explained in the limitations, we don't know what would be the trendy systems in the future, but everything is like this when we research in this field because everything is continuously changing. Maybe we may have time for only one question, but very, very brief, please, in the audience. No one? Okay, so maybe, Rama-san, we can wait, and if in the end we have more questions for the debate, we can go back to the reflection. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And now we welcome Dr. Yara El-Turk, that will bring the presentation from democratic infrastructure to infrocratic drift, governing digital polarization in the European Union's neighborhood.
Thank you. Just a moment so I can share my screen.
Yes, we can see you, we can hear you, and we will see your screen very soon. We see it very now. Yes, it's
Can
perfect.
you see it? Okay, perfect.
Wonderful.
Okay, so good morning. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Yara. I'm based in Beirut, Lebanon, and I'm as a socio-technical researcher and peace ambassador with the Institute for Economics and Peace. My work focuses on a critical intersection, how the digital architectures we inhabit are fundamentally re-engineering the societies we seek to stabilize. So today we are exploring a transition that is as subtle as dangerous, which is a journey from democratic infrastructure to what I term infrocratic drift. Oops, just a moment. Okay, there we go. Okay, so today's discussion will follow a 10-point trajectory. So we will begin by defining the problem of infocracy and the paradoxes inherent in our digital platforms. I will then introduce the concept of infographic drift and theoretical framework, combining socio-technical system theory with intercultural emotional intelligence that underpins my research. And we will dive into my award-winning ACT-EU strategy for digital democratic infrastructure, examining case studies from the Western Balkans and the Southern Mediterranean. And we will conclude with actionable policy recommendations. So let me begin with a central problem that motivated this research. So when digital platforms, they first emerged, there was a promise of democratic deliberation, of giving voice to the voiceless, of connecting citizens across borders. And we were told that social media would empower citizens, that access to information would spread, and that, new forms of civic participation would flourish. However, we can all agree that the promise has not been fulfilled. And instead, we have witnessed the rise of what this symposium terms infocracy, a regime where information flows are optimized not for civic enlightenment, but for engagement, for keeping users clicking, for harvesting user data, and also for algorithmic control, shaping what we see and think, not giving the citizens agency. So this shift is not only theoretical, it is visible in the daily experience of citizens across the globe. And nowhere it is more acute in the EU's Eastern and Southern neighborhood, regions where democratic consolidation is already fragile, and where disinformation campaigns and platform-driven polarization threaten both social cohesion and political stability. This brings us to a fundamental paradox. So digital platforms do enable civic participation. They provide a stage for citizen journalism and cross-border solidarity. We saw this during the various uprisings across the Mediterranean. However, the very same platform logic that enables a protest also undermines democracy through the algorithmic amplification of outrage. Like we have data extremism that treats our social interaction as raw material, while echo chambers and filter bubbles ensure that our democratic deliberation is merely an exchange of prepackaged grievances. And this is here the paradox. So the tools that promised to democratize communication are now central to its degradation. So platform logics which are undermining democracy is not actually a bug, it's the feature of how platforms are designed. So to capture this transformation, I have introduced used the concept of infographic drift. So infographic drift consists of the gradual replacement of democratic deliberation by information architectures optimized for control rather than consent. And it is vital to understand that this is not simply polarization or disinformation. Basically, what we are seeing are symptoms. And the drift is a structural transformation. It is the way information is produced and distributed in such a way that the architecture of the platform dictates the outcome of the political discourse before a single word is even typed. And if you want to address polarization, we need to address the infrastructure that enables it. To analyze this problem, I draw on three interconnected theoretical frameworks. So the first one being socio-technical system theory. It recognizes that technology and society co-create each other. So you cannot fix a technical algorithm without addressing the social grievances it feeds on. The second theory is intercultural emotional intelligence, or ICEI. This is a framework I developed during my doctoral research. It integrates emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence to understand how people navigate differences. So digital polarization is not only about information, it's really about the identity, the emotion, and how the narratives are shaping our belonging. And when we understand why certain messages they resonate emotionally, we can begin to design interventions that speak to those dynamics. And the third theory is understanding how institutional rules and incentives shape how platforms operate. So together, these frameworks, they allow me to analyze digital polarization and as a socio-technical challenge that requires both structural and human-centered solutions. This research led to my strategy paper, Building Bridges, Not Walls, which was awarded first place in 2025. The core argument here is that we have been approaching digital governance backwards, meaning we focus on content moderation, we take down harmful posts, we fact check individual claims, but we leave the underlying infrastructure intact. So this is like trying to clean a river by filtering individual drops of water while the factory upstream is still polluting. So I argue here that we need to treat digital governance as infrastructure, just as we build roads, bridges, and electricity grids to enable economic activity. We need to build digital democratic infrastructure to enable healthy public discourse. So what does digital democratic infrastructure look like in practice? It rests actually on 4 pillars. The first one being platform accountability. We need transparency and independent oversight to align algorithmic design with democratic values. And we need to be able to see how algorithmic work and hold them accountable when they cause harm. The second pillar is public interest media. So we must be able to support independent fact-checking and public service media to ensure they have the resources to counter disinformation. And the third pillar is civic education. This is about building digital resilience and intercultural literacy, so citizens are able to navigate information ecosystems critically, recognize manipulation, and engage across difference. And the final pillar is about regional cooperation. So platforms, they actually operate across borders. And national regulation alone cannot actually address cross-border information flows. So we need like a shared governance frameworks that enable cooperation across the EU's neighborhood. Let me ground this into concrete examples, starting with the Western Balkans. So this region is home to EU's candidate countries with fragile democratic institutions, places where the promise of EU integration has driven reform, but where nationalist narratives and hybrid regime dynamics remain powerful. So what infocratic dynamics we see here? First, we see platforms that amplify nationalist narratives because they generate engagement. Second, disinformation campaigns specifically target EU integration, sowing doubt about the benefits of membership. And the third is algorithms reward divisive content, pushing moderation out of the conversation. So the lesson from the Western Balkans here is that early intervention matters. We have to build digital resilience before crisis hit, before elections, before referendums, before major political transitions, because by the time polarization has entrenched, it is much harder to reverse. So prevention here is easier than cure. Turning to Southern Mediterranean, we see a different but equal challenging context. So in countries like Lebanon, a post-conflict society marked by sectarian divisions and a large diaspora, digital platforms have become central to political life. And the infographic dynamics we see here is that first, the digital platforms, they amplify sectarian narratives because they resonate emotionally and drive engagement. Second, diaspora communities, often more polarized than those in the homeland, they shape narratives from abroad. And third, platform logics intersect with local political struggles in ways that can escalate the conflict rather than bridge divides. So the lesson here is that technical solutions alone are not enough. Effective intervention requires deep engagement with local narratives, identities, and emotional language and landscape. And this is where my intercultural and emotional intelligence framework it becomes essential because it helps us understand not just what platforms do, but how they interact in human emotions and cultural context. Based on this analysis, I want to offer 4 concrete recommendations. The first 2 being more structural. Democratic Infrastructure Fund. So the EU should establish like a funding mechanism dedicated to public interest platform development and digital resilience. The second one being early warning mechanisms. We must create systems capable of detecting algorithmic manipulation and coordinated disinformation before they escalate into real-world violence. The final 2 recommendations, they focus on the human aspect. So embed intercultural emotional intelligence in media literacy. So we must integrate this framework into curricula. It's like to be able to know why our emotions are being triggered by a specific narrative. And the 4th recommendation is to shift from content to infrastructure. So we must move from the regulatory focus away from individual posts and toward the underlying architecture, the incentives, the code that shapes the entire ecosystem. So in conclusion, I want to return to the central idea of this presentation, which is we have been approaching digital governance backwards. So focusing on content while ignoring infrastructure. And it's really time to reframe the conversation. And the solution here that I'm suggesting is digital democratic infrastructure to build systems that enable democratic deliberation and not just manage the surface level symptoms. So it's about designing platforms that serve democracy. It's a toolkit for navigating the transition from democracy to infocracy, a roadmap for how we might build the bridges that lead us back. So it's not easy. It will definitely require political will and sustained commitment. But the alternative, which is continued infocratic drift, is currently not acceptable. So these are some few references that I've used, and thank you for your time and your commitment to a more resilient digital future. I'm happy to take any questions. You can reach me at the email address on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. El Turk. It was completely informative, and especially I would like to congratulate you for the efficient use of the time that you did, because all the information was very clear and very well presented. It's without any kind of doubt, not only a very interesting topic, but also very needed for our society. And yes, of course, we need a clear infrastructure that help us in something that it is a significant part in our daily lives, and we are experiencing it without knowing how and without a protection and a kind of legal support that can help us how to do, especially relevant when you made the recommendations, and in the third one you included the idea of having that in our curricula, because without this perspective, if we don't educate our society and our children about how to deal with it, it will be very complicated. So thank you so much. It's very interesting and also something that is actionable, something that we can do. So for that, it is a great contribution. Maybe we have time for a quite short question in the audience, because of course it is a very interesting topic and we could debate a lot on that, but maybe we don't have so much time. So maybe, but one short questions, no? Okay, so thank you so much again, Dr. Turk. We will go on with the next presenter, that is the PhD student Birkan Kok. And the presentation will be Waiting to be Watched, Voluntary Surveillance and Self-Discipline in Study With Me videos. Welcome, welcome to the floor.
Thank you so much. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you, we can see you, and we also see your screen. So everything is perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm Birkan. I studied English literature for my bachelor's and then continued my master's in new media and communications management. And now I'm pursuing my PhD in communications at Istanbul University and also working as a brand marketing manager at TRT, Turkish Radio and Television Corporation. So my paper is actually focuses on a very personal experience, let's say, because whenever I try to study for my work or for my PhD, I use study playlists or maybe focus musics on Spotify and YouTube Music. But whenever I type study with these kind of search for these kind of music on YouTube, I always end up seeing these study with me videos. So one day I decided to take a look at these videos and something interesting caught my attention actually, because uh, we can see these study with me videos as uh, usually long study videos with some presenter, some creator share their experiences while they're studying and something like this on the screen. There's no distraction, it's all quiet, no speaking, no talking, only just taking notes by themselves. And they are like accompanying us while we are studying. It's the main motto, main reason why they publish these videos on their accounts. And when I checked the literature regarding these study with me videos, it is said that they create this sense of shared presence. And another study see these videos as online affinity spaces where learners engage in a shared common interest to manage their productivity, to increase their productivity or increase their focus. And these videos also got really popular right after COVID. There's also data on that. And the literature itself is, I found two pieces of work regarding parasocial interaction because the creators broadcast from their living rooms, from their bedrooms, and this creates a very sense of closeness and but at the same time an illusion of togetherness. It mimics it somehow. So, and we can also say that these videos also minimize the psychological the isolation caused by studying alone, studying by yourself. To increase your focus and productivity. And these are the main topics that the Study With Me videos and how they discussed in the current literature. For my PhD thesis, I am researching about how AI-supported hyper-personalization practices affect and changes, and what are their reflections on consumer identity through Bauman's liquid modernity. So, postmodern studies and liquid modernity studies are really like let's say the core of my theoretical background for my PhD work. So I also wanted to see these videos from a perspective of the project-oriented self, how self is changing in liquid modernity, what are the drivers. So Bauman actually tells us to look at this from five different lenses: the emancipation, individuality, and so on. So what he actually says is everything is changeable, nothing is solid, everything solid melts into air, let's say. And there's a constant shift and constant change in the postmodern, the liquid modern era. So the self itself also somehow liquidifies, let's say. But the main idea is behind that the project, the self becomes like a project. So we need to work, we need to study all the time to become a better version of ourselves. And he also quotes Lewis Carroll in his book, in his Liquid Modernity book. If you want to stay where you are, you need to study hard. But if you need to continue, if you need to become a better version of yourself, you need to study harder. But in our current world, it's not always an easy task to study all the time to become a better version of yourself because we can also quote like risk society to back or the other sociologists as well because whatever we do, even if we work too hard for it, it's not always guaranteed we need that we can reach a certain point. So I also wanted to connect Bauman's liquid modernity to something on the digital world, and I chose Sherry Turkle's Alone Together study because it's also giving the idea that physical solitude is eliminated while we are experiencing this digital presence. And it is also very controlled. The closeness on digital world is a controlled closeness that creates comfort for the viewer for without emotional labor or any other demands. And when I think of this through this panoptic view from Foucault to Deleuze, the surveillance is also becomes more liquid. And Leon and Bauman also says that in their liquid surveillance study. But when I think of this, all of these things, that maybe I'm making it too complicated, but there are so many things that I want to connect in my theoretical background. I see and sense that surveillance is becoming something like a service, something people demand, something to keep their motivation and focus to continue. And that's why I think it will all make sense when I try to tell you about the methodology and the videos that I chose for this video. So I made a quick YouTube Google keyword trend search for study with me videos, and I come up with this is also very assuring that we can see that also on YouTube trend Google Trends. The data shows that it got more popular after COVID. And the most related queries with study with me videos are Pomodoro. One of those are Pomodoro videos. And Pomodoro is a technique that you study for 40 minutes and then you give a 5 minutes break. Or you study 50 minutes and give a 10 minutes break. So we see a lot of study with me videos use this technique. But what is interesting to me is some of these videos show it's very stereotypical, but Asian mom is watching you whilst you are studying, because we all hear that stereotypical that Asians are studied too hard. And so there is this figurative authority in that video. And another video shows a German World War II German soldier, and he's watching us if you're studying or not. So it's actually a blank space. You study, and the guy, the soldier, comes in every 15 minutes or 20 minutes. He's checking on you whether you're working or not. So that's the idea. So to be able to find these kind of videos, I use watching you, role play, and supervision keywords, and then chose the videos on the first page, like let's say the most related and popular results on YouTube. But I wanted to, while choosing all those videos and creating my sample, I wanted to make some closeness within the data itself. So I checked the video title, the thumbnail. I watched the first 5 minutes, and I also checked the other parts of the video. And I chose only videos longer than an hour because it should be an extended study, let's say, that should be a session. And because figurative authority videos have like 10 or 15,000 comments, I also wanted the Pomodoro videos to be over 1,000 comments. And I wanted to look at the current situation. So I chose the last 2 years. So I used Python and YouTube Data API version 3 to collect this data, and used Jupyter Lab for data exploration process. And I gathered all these comments as the raw comments at here, and then I chose 50,000 comments as these are the top level comments. But it will be so hard for me to read all those comments and create codes and analyze all those comments. So I chose 400 newest and 400 top like comments for 50 for each video, for each of those 8 videos, and then started my reflexive thematic analysis process. And so these are my code scheme, but these are manual. I didn't use MaxQDA or any other software, so I took as much notes as possible and tried to make sense of it. in the end. So what I can say about the Pomodoro videos and personified the figurative authority videos, there is this time protocol. It's all session based in Pomodoro videos, and the regulation, the feeling of regulation is conveyed through that. Because there is this 45 minutes studying and 5 minutes of break. And the willpower contract, actually, viewers gamify their studying sessions, their experience, let's say, by saying, if this comment gets 100 likes, I will study 1 more hour or something like that. So they're communicating and interacting with each other and gamify that whole process as well to me. And there is this exam and deadline. Like almost everyone is saying, they need to catch a deadline, or they have an upcoming important exam they need to be studying and focusing. And this is their justifications actually to watch these videos in some way. And for figurative authority videos, the creator's presence, like let's say if it's a mother figure, or if it's a German soldier figure, this creates a personified gaze. Someone actively watching you, someone actively monitoring you. And what are the drivers? When I ask this question, it is triggered by shame, fear, and pressure. These are very interesting as well, but somehow expected and unexpected as well. But the supervision, it's also very symbolic to me, because whenever they want, they can log off, they can close the tab and just stop watching that video. But comments show that they actually not watch this video, but they study, and while they're studying, the video is playing on the background. And they say it's very practical and fruitful and help them to focus and concentrate. So just because I mentioned shared circles alone together study, I wanted to connect this social layer and what are these videos are actually creating for the viewers. This shared presence, this togetherness, there is an online bond between the creator and the audience, and also between the audiences. There is this digital witness, I said, because I study, I try my best. People also comment write also this kind of comments, and you are the witness that I'm studying, that I'm trying. There are also this part, and the appreciation and gratitude is also expressed for the creator. And almost like not everyone, of course, but many people thanks the creator for providing that kind of content for them that is helping them to become a better version of themselves, let's say. But yeah, these are my notes and presentation. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free.
Thank you so much, Birkan. For
You're
me,
welcome.
I must confess that it was a great surprise to know that this kind of content exists, because I did not have any idea of that.
Yeah.
And even really interesting to see that, okay, people are studying and they have the video, but just because they have it, they get focus. It resembles a bit to me like sorry, I had the timer for the presentations. That the conductivist and the Pavlov bell and the dog being hungry. So it is a kind of, okay, because I have it, I can focus. It's quite interesting to see this new version of voluntary surveillance. Yes, it's quite interesting. Do we have maybe questions in the audience? Because for sure it's a very interesting topic and very surprising. At least for me, I don't know if in your case you were familiar with it, but it is my first connection with this kind of content. Do we have questions? No? Okay, also, Virkan, I really like it, the philosophical approach, because of course I
Thank you.
understand that many times when we research in this era and everything that has to do with algorithms and whatever, we go so much in the technical part, because of course it is needed. but the humanistic approach and philosophical approach is completely needed to understand what is happening as the people that are experiencing that so important transformation. So thank you so much. It was very interesting, and of course,
Thank you, Professor.
my best wishes for your doctoral studies. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and I think that maybe the next presenters are not in the session, but so for that we could go through to the last presentation. Am I right that we don't have the presenters for the fourth presentation in the schedule? I think that we don't have Dr. Daniel Batista and the master student author Guglielmo. We don't have them, right?
No, we don't. They don't have. We don't have them here now, Professor. So they are not with us.
Okay, so in that case, we will go directly with the associate professor Özgür Kaliskan. I'm so sorry if I am not pronouncing it well.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for being so kind. And we will have from him the presentation, Who Tells the Future? The dialogue between artificial intelligence and dystopian cinema in infocratic future narratives. So only with the title that is very promising, we imagine that we will have a very, very interesting presentation. So thank you so much,
Thank you.
Dr. Orwood. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you see my slide? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We see the slides,
Okay.
we see you, we hear you,
Okay.
everything is perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As you can see that my title is Who Tells the Future? The dialogue between artificial intelligence and dystopian cinema in infocratic future narratives. So I start this idea from of course, a simple but little bit politically loaded question, like who narrates the future today in what terms? So in digital age, the narratives of the future are no longer produced only in parliaments, think tanks, films, and novels. They are also produced by large language models, which, when prompted, generate long, coherent, and apparently authoritative projections of what politics, economy, and everyday life may look like around 2035. So my argument is that these models have to be treated not only as tools, but as narrative actors whose outputs help define the meaning and limits of the future. So to explore these, I read together the two data. On the one hand, the answers given by AI systems like ChatGPT, Gemini, Cloud Sonnet, Grok, DeepSeek, Alice Yandex, and Sonar to a series of structured questions about the near future. And on the other hand, a set of dystopian and science fiction films like Minority Report, Gattaca, Brazil, 1984, The Matrix, and on some episodes of Black Mirror, a Turkish film, Once Upon a Time in the Future, 2121. So the central claim is that the specifically infocratic futures emerged from this encounter, like a future narratively organized around information, prediction, and governance, where power operates through data infrastructures and algorithmic systems, and where the imagined solutions to risk are overwhelmingly technocratic. So let me first change the work for the beginning. So growing body of research argues that AI is not only a technical apparatus, but a site of narrative production. So studies of European Union AI policy, for example, show how official documents craft broad stories about AI as economic engine, security threat, and ethical challenge in order to coordinate actors and reduce political uncertainty. This has been conceptualized as a narrative governance in work from the early 2020s, I guess. So these analyses demonstrate that policy does not simply respond to technology. It narrates technology in ways that authorize certain forms of intervention and sideline others. In parallel, research on AI narratives in global governance has identified that recurring frames through which international actors position AI, like as an economic giant, a governance problem and an enabler of human progress, for instance. So in order to shape institutional agendas and geopolitical alignments. So these works appearing around the early to mid 2020s underline that the struggle over AI is also struggle over who gets to tell the authoritative story about AI and its future role in the world order. So another important trend is the literature and algorithmic governance, of course, so which emerged in the 2010s and has been further elaborated in 2020s. Here, the argument is that the algorithms increasingly become instruments of governing by organizing visibility, sorting populations, allocating the resources, and structuring choice. Often outside classical legal or bureaucratic forms. Instead of only governing through laws and institutions, contemporary regimes govern through code, platforms, and predictive models. So this is highly relevant to my findings, I guess. The AI systems I analyze imagine the future precisely in terms of such infrastructural steering. And systematic reviews of responsible AI governance, for example, those published in 2000, I think maybe in the last 3 years, mapped the rapidly expanding ecosystem of standards, audits, impact assessments, oversight bodies, and ethical guidelines. The common trait in this work is that the future is framed as a space of manageable risk. So if we design the right governance mechanisms, we can both harvest AI's benefits and contain its harms. The managerial horizon is mirrored very clearly in the large language models and all discourse about the future. Yes, this one. And more recently, media and cultural theory has started to treat generative AI itself as a narrative medium. So studies of AI in narrative media argue that the large language models produce mimetic simulation of words, textual spaces that blur boundaries between representation, prediction, and prescription. In this view, AI outputs are neither neutral nor purely informative. They are forms of storytelling whose structure is shaped by training data in dominant genres. So, to conceptualize power in these developments, of course, I draw from the Foucault notions of biopolitics and governmentality from the late 1970s, because how the modern power works less through spectacular punishment and more through the regulation of life, population, health, circulation, and risk. Recent work applying from Foucault to AI and law argues that contemporary AI regimes can be seen as new dispositive of governmentality that define, classify, and manage the subjects. And when we come to the recent studies, for example, there's a work of Soshana Zubov, if I pronounce correctly, from the 2019s and subsequent elaborations in the early 1920s. These studies show that how digital infrastructures extract behavioral data, transform it into predictive products, and thereby create new markers in the future behavior. So putting these trends together, my paper positions large language models as new agents of narrative governance and governmentality. They do not only appear in the stories, they actively tell stories about the future that align in many ways with institutional and technocratic imaginaries documented in the literature also. Dystopian cinema, on the other hand, provides an aesthetic and critical counter space where those same structures of power are rendered visible, sensible, and constatable. So, as empirically, this research consists of, like, as I mentioned before, the 2 steps with these 7 AI systems or language models, we can say, with a set of structured questions. I ask some structured questions. The key prompts ask how this system imagine power relations between AI and humans around 2035. What they see as the most serious risk in digital surveillance and privacy over the next 10, 20 years. So how they expect algorithms to shape political decision making, how data and information are likely to be concentrated, and how everyday life for ordinary people might be organized by algorithmic systems. So these prompts that I elicited long, multi-paragraph answers on politics, economy, and everyday life. I then performed a qualitative discourse analysis on this material, looking for recurring problems for framing, metaphors, and narrative structure. And in the second steps, as I mentioned, I compare these results or analysis with some science fiction and speculative fiction films. And my findings, the analysis of these AI responses reveals a dense and surprisingly consistent discursive landscape. First, there is the normalization and expansion of surveillance. The systems repeatedly imagine governments deploying AI for predictive policing, social credit style scoring, real-time monitoring of communications, and massive data fusion across public and private databases. Surveillance is often framed as incremental, as a sequence of reasonable choices like smart cities, security, efficiency, that collectively produce an environment of near total observability. Importantly, this is not framed as an aberration. It appears as a rational response to complexity and insecurity, entirely in line with the literature on security and algorithmic governance, where the state takes on the task of preempting risk. And secondly, there is a strong theme of privacy erosion and the loss of anonymity. The answers emphasize that ubiquitous sensors, biometric identification, gait and voice recognition, device fingerprinting, and cross-platform tracking make it increasingly difficult to inhabit spaces, both physical and digital, without leaving traceable data. Privacy becomes a luxury or an inconvenience, something mostly available to those with time, resources, and specialized knowledge. Some systems explicitly note that non-sensitive data can be used to infer sensitive attributes like a health status, political beliefs, and even sexual orientation, which echoes concerns in surveillance studies that inference rather than raw data has become the main locus of power. And thirdly, the responses converge on data monopolies and infrastructure concentration. They consistently insist that the key power divide is not human versus machine, but between institutions with privileged access to the models, compute, data, and infrastructure, and those without such access. States, like a few frontier model firms, cloud providers, and platform companies are imagined as the main beneficiaries of AI-driven power, while civil society, labor, and the global periphery struggle to secure voice and access. This resonates strongly with work on global AI governance that documents how global North actors, especially, disproportionately shape the strategic priorities, standards, and imaginings of AI, and how the AI majority must fight participation in setting the rules. Oh, sorry. I hope I have time more, but I will finish in my time. Sorry. So importantly, I think there is some labor transformation and precarity issue. The AI systems repeatedly project that a large share of routine cognitive and even some high-skill tasks will be automated or heavily augmented, like legal research, coding, auditing, customer support, logistics, and administration. They imagine these divided labor markets in which relatively small class of AI symbolic professionals oversee and orchestrate systems, while a larger group of occupies more precarious, low autonomy roles that are either too dexterous, effective, or marginal to be fully automated. And fifthly, the model strongly emphasizes comfort, optimization, and dependencies in everyday life. They imagine personal AI agents handling scheduling, health, education, social life, financial decision, and bureaucratic interactions. This is cast in positive terms, like removing friction, increasing accessibility, freeing up time, but this also produces new regime of dependence in which everyday decisions are shaped by the system that anticipate needs, filter options, and nudge the behavior. And from governmental perspective, this is a crucial, I think. Power no longer appears as a command from above, but as an ambient guidance, but built into the architecture of services and interfaces. I will jump maybe if I have time, I don't know, but as the last part, like
No worries, you can take the time that you need
okay,
since we missed one of
okay,
the presentations.
because it was like a lot
No, no.
of findings. Sorry.
No
Okay,
worries, because I see that your findings are long and we have many slides, but of course,
yes,
as we have
thank you.
time, this is not any problem.
Okay,
Thank you so
okay.
much.
And I think for the question for the AI systems, this is the last findings, the sixth one, and perhaps I think this one is my central for my argument is the prominence of algorithmic governance as the horizon across the corpus, like the AI system that I chose. Political life is narrated in terms of predictive administration and data-driven policy and automated compliance and crisis modeling. Uh, when the dangers are mentioned here, like deepfakes, disinformation, manipulation, bias, and authoritarian uses, solutions are framed in managerial vocabulary like better regulation, transparency, auditing, human in the loop, or like a democratic oversight. This is where I think my literature and my findings are most clearly like the AI system reproduce in their own way the narrative that the future is governable field of the risk and opportunity to be managed by the right mix of technical design and institutional safeguards. Conflict is recorded as like a calibration. The structural domination becomes a problem of misuse to be corrected. And lastly, that like as I mentioned before, like I try to check some science fiction because I'm coming from the cinema and television background, like my main area is cinema and science fiction cinema. So I checked some dialogue between dystopian cinemas. So on the side of continuity, many films in the examples here anticipate similar configurations like a Minority Report, it's a famous one, with its pre-crime and predictive policing, and Gattaca with genetic and data-driven sorting of life chances, Anon with the collapse of privacy in a fully researchable world, and the Matrix, like also its famous film, with the total infrastructural dependence, and Her, also another famous one, with the effective attachment to mechanic compassions, and Black Mirror in the some episodes, like with the saturation of everyday life by scores, reputation, and algorithmic evolution. So, however, the mode of narration is radically different. Where the AI systems speak in the cool idiom of policy and governance, dystopian cinema embodies the effects of this system in bodies, emotions, and situations. It shows that humiliation at the like a airport checkpoint, panic under the predictive policing, the slow erosion of the trust, the exclusion of performing for scores, the loneliness of mediated intimacy. So what the dystopian cinema adds here, therefore, is not simply more dramatic version of the same future, but a different epistemology of power, like Minority Report, Gattaca, Anon, and Black Mirror episodes make visible how visible how abstract systems of classification, prediction, and control are actually live at the level of the body, intimacy, and everyday product. So they show that the surveillance is not only a technical infrastructure, but also an effective condition. That algorithmic sorting is not only an administrative procedure, but also a source of shame, exclusion, and anxiety. And that dependence on the intelligence system reshapes not only decisions, but also perceptions, trust, and subjectivity itself. In this sense, dystopian cinema translates infocratic structures into felt experience. That is precisely what tends to disappear in the managerial language of AI-generated future discourse. So, in other words, maybe I can say both AI discourse and dystopian films addresses infocratic futures, but they effectively code them differently. The models predominantly frame these futures as problems to be managed. The films frame them as lived crisis of subjectivity, justice, and everyday life. So the former tend to domesticate the future, the latter estrange it. And conclusion, uh, so it shows that my study and my results shows that large language models are already participating in what we might call the government of the future at the level of discourse. They generate future narratives that align with the institutional and technocratic imaginaries documented in AI governance and surveillance studies. And they do so in a way that normalizes surveillance, inequality, and infrastructural dependence as administratively manageable conditions. But secondly, by placing these AI narratives alongside dystopian cinema, so we need, I think, the both registers if we want to think critically about infocratic futures. AI discourse reveals how the future is being domesticated as an object of governance. Dystopian cinema keeps open an aesthetic and affective space in which the cost of these futures, like on bodies, relationships, and political subjectivity, can still be perceived and contested. So when we ask who tells the future, the answer is, I think, no longer only the filmmaker, the policymaker, or the novelists. It's also the model. Recognizing large language models as a narrative actors means acknowledging that they help shape the symbolic conditions under which certain futures come to feel more probable, more rational, and more acceptable than others. So that recognition, maybe if we can understand these LLMs models, I would argue is necessary to step if we want to politicize these futures rather than only we have them administrated to us. Thank you, sorry, for listening. I hope I didn't keep it long. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Yes, you took a bit more of the time.
Yes, yes,
It
yeah, thank you.
deserve it. No worries for that. Maybe we can have
Oh,
a
I have to
kind
stop
of
the sharing, sorry.
no worries. Everything is okay. So maybe we can have a little debate, or we may have questions for Dr. Othgur. It's very interesting. I have a suggestion. I don't know if you know this film. I will paste it in the chat. It is this film is
Yeah, artificial. I think it's an Italian film.
it is Spanish and Portuguese.
Spanish, sorry,
Yes.
I know. Yeah, yes, I know that one.
And yes, and it is another example of how
Mm-hmm.
this dystopian future has been
Mm-hmm.
told to us, and now we
Mm-hmm.
are experiencing it.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for bringing this reflection, because many times we feel that aspects that had been described in this dystopian cinema decades ago, we have already overpassed them with other
Mm-hmm.
different situations. But yes, what it is clear is that the system itself and the code itself is applying a way not only into the idea of predicting, but also in the idea of writing what we keep in our history and what we experience. So it's a very relevant study and very, very interesting. Thank you so much. I would like to
I also want to mention that because, of course, in my long paper it will be, but the results of these 7 different LLM systems and their prediction of the futures are quite also, I think, really showing that they are guessing from geographically where are they from, these different systems. They are really have different kind of future expectations.
portray.
Yeah. This is something that also I have to mention, but of course, in the long paper, the whole paper, it will be seen.
Yes, we understand that it is a lot of information and difficult to sum up everything.
Mm.
But yes, when we reflect that the code itself is applying an intent in the discourse, we need to, we are not naive enough to forget that there are people behind the code, there are interests behind the code. And now, even while you were presenting, it came to me the first presentation when we were talking about this kind of humanized response that we receive from the long large models, and in which they fake to be human people, and they fake some kind of emotions in the responses that, of course, they don't exist. but everything is like in a template. And we see here the same. We are telling the future with different templates. So for that, it's very, very interesting. Thank you so much. So yes, if you don't have more questions or more comments, no? Okay, I only have to say thank you so much. I feel very grateful for the opportunity to share the time with you, for participating in your presentations. All of them are quite solid, very timely and interesting pieces of research. Thank you so much, Dr. Turk. And by the way, thank you so much for sharing your paper. I took a picture with it. I downloaded through the QR code. I will read it later. And so it was very interesting. And I hope that you are also having the opportunity to enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you so much to the organizers, and of course, as always, to the University of ID in Istanbul. It was my great pleasure. So I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference and a great day. Thank you so much, Ibrahim, also
Thank
for
you.
your assistance.
Thank you very much, Professor
Thank you.
Isabel. It was really insightful and open-minded in your moderation. And hope to see you next year's.
Yes, of course. You know that we are in cooperation in the long term. This is nice. This is
Exactly.
a really nice cooperation. So thank you so much for everything, and have a nice day.
Have a nice day.
Bye
Thank you,
bye.
everybody.